And we're back now with our delightful guest, Michele. How do you pronounce your last name? Because he's German. He knows German, but we don't know if you're like.
I want to hear Richard say it.
Specht.
See, yes, he knows here in our country it's just Specht. But yes, Richard does it correctly.
Das ist great.
Yeah. Do you know kind of generally what it refers to as well, Richard?
No.
It is in part in several areas. I've been told by several native Germans that they know it as a red-headed woodpecker.
I see.
Which I thought was kind of
appropriate,
actually.
Yeah. Well, welcome, red-headed woodpecker, and we're so glad to have you. And you actually picked. So I take great pride and joy in randomly picking the episode between every Sunday and the next Sunday. And as I came up to watching this one, like looking in my queue, I was like, this could be hit or miss. Like, I could really love this, or I might not, like, because I didn't choose this. And it so happens that this was awesome. And so you chose an amazing episode for us to talk about and to examine and enjoy and learn about and create around. And so I'm super excited. We've got some delicious questions for you. What I'm going to do is circle first over what we call the opening salvo, which is, between me and Richard, we have some idea of what the beating heart core of the episode is, and we basically figure that out and we sink into it. Later on, we'll get to funny things like Vic's use of the word sabotage, which is a classic Shatner thing.
Yep.
Yeah, that I really appreciated. But for now, there's just so much here. Richard and I had just started talking about people being uplifted, right, by encounter with the barrier and having special powers and being weaponized. And I went off on this whole thing about how humans, it would be great for us to evolve. And then I invented a new figure of speech to express how I stifled him, which was, I'm sorry to have bitten your tongue. And I never got a read on whether or not you appreciated that, Richard, but I'm going to stop biting your tongue now. So please, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so my opening thoughts on the episode are, I think the core moment that made me excited about the episode was when the Andorian Starfleet Admiral told Kirk, you need to go into the neutral zone and all the way possibly to the Romulan home world, just because that was the moment when you realized, what is this Star Trek Continues thing? This is what we always wanted to see. This is the series conclusion that original series really deserved. This is the thing that we would have been just so incredibly excited to see as a continuation of what we actually saw in the original show. And from that perspective, the fact that the sets look exactly like they looked like on the original series, the special effects are exactly the same in style. Even the way that the shots are done is done with such care. It really puts you in this mindset that this really is the continuation of the original series that we've been hoping for. We're talking about the concept that this is sort of fan service. And, that's kind of a derogatory term, but this is the best kind of fan service. This is not in any way pandering. This is the best form of what anyone wants to see. And so it's got this. We were talking about the idea of the espers and how they're uplifted and how they represent an evolved form of humanity. And just to react to that a bit, Star Trek seems to have this really sort of ambivalent relationship with the idea of evolution, because there's always this idea of humanity evolving and expanding and making itself better. Well, how has that happened for 4 billion years? It's been through a natural selection. And yet,
right.
Star Trek doesn't seem to like the idea that some people might get better such that they are, selected over other people. And so there's a really interesting sort of philosophical deep theme there, which complements the fact that it's just straight up great action and what we want to see. And that's what makes it really good fan service, because it's not just, the sauce. it's also the meat of what makes Star Trek interesting.
And I don't want to bite Michelle's tongue. This figure of speech is probably not going to catch on. It's very confusing. But or yours again, Richard. It must be bruised by now. But there is something I have to say. When you talk about the meat of the show, and this is something I maybe saw because I was biased about the fact that you were going to come on this episode, but I think it fits. So I think that your character, Dr. McKenna, especially in these last moments, really symbolizes the whole series. Like the whole show, Star Trek Continues. Like the fact that there can be these lost years in between the original series and the movies, and that they are still really impactful on the characters. And that there's this graceful, elegant, seamless, acceptance of death that it's just effortlessly played, and it's it's totally human. It's totally valuable for us to have somebody who is a representation of emotional depth and intricacy and the acceptance of that in life, facing death in such a noble way, and then sort of exemplifying to us what's possible in that. You are the gentleness and the depthful compassion of Star Trek made into a character who sacrifices herself.
Wow.
That's what I saw anyway.
Yes. I've been trying so hard to not bite on anybody else's tongue. I'm gonna pick up that term and roll on it.
Yes.
Yes. I love what both of you gentlemen have said, and I think that there are, to me, the goal of the overall show, just to kind of pull back the microscope a little bit, the goal of what we were trying to do was absolutely create a bridge between the last episode of the original series that we saw and the years that happened in between that we have no idea what transpired. And then when the first Star Trek movie comes out, all of these changes have happened, but we have no idea why. Why is Kirk at a desk job? Why is Dr. McCoy back on Earth and out of Starfleet? Why did Spock go back to Vulcan and purge all of his remaining emotions? There was no explanation. There was no finality to the series, number one, and there was no explanation or bridge to kind of show us what may or may not have happened during those years. So that's exactly the purpose of this show. And yes, from a technical standpoint, our sets are down to the inch exact replicas of the Desilu soundstage. Down to the inch. They are, when you walk onto our sets, it is as if you are walking onto the Desilu soundstage, and as you walk around them, they are exactly the way that those actors did back starting in 1966. So it is as close as you can come to the original shooting soundstage anywhere, and they are still standing, which is so beautiful. But even the shots, we're shooting them in 4x3. Our director of photography, there were so many amazing and generous and passionate, talented people who gave their time and effort to make this into what it was. And Matt Busey, our director of photography, his lighting, there is something so unique about Star Trek lighting and framing of the shots, and he did that, I think, perfectly, absolutely perfectly. The colors that are there, the vibrancy, the way each scene and shot is composed, all of those things. There was a lot of time and effort put into creating that look and that feel, and having people be able to get lost in it, because it is jarring to see different people playing these characters that they know and love, and it is jarring to have somebody like me or like Kipley Brown, who are, characters that you don't know, kind of be plopped in there. And it was so terrifying on my part that she would appear in any way shoehorned. I just didn't want her to be, I just wanted her to fit in. And after the first episode, and especially after the second, it became clear that, 99 out of 100 people really welcomed her and they embraced her. And as someone who grew up on TNG, that's me, I was so in love and so excited with the idea of showing how a ship's counselor showed up. Because 80 years later on TNG, they were on every flipping ship, but how did they get there? So it was so exciting and terrifying at the same time to imagine, being the pilot program for that position. But getting back to the episode, oh gosh, there's so much to unpack here. I don't even know where to start. Where can I start?
Wherever you want.
Oh, geez. First of all, I was so moved by everything that culminated in this one episode. I was so moved by the fact that, exactly as Kirk says in his last speech, that the greatest thing that ended up still being, the thing that ended up being humanity's greatest challenge was still ourselves, because those uplifted persons with those amazing abilities and powers still had human nature behind them and driving them, or Romulan nature behind them and driving them, meaning the search for power and the search to dominate and the search for revenge and the desire that, that kind of our most basest qualities ended up being the things we need to fear the most. And I thought that was truly beautiful. That was my favorite part of that, is that Star Trek, I think for me, has always been the show that gave humanity and showed humanity's hope. I think a lot of people feel that way. It showed us a future that I certainly want to be a part of. It is not a dystopic, barren wasteland. It is one of beauty and possibility and hope. Humanity does good. We make good. We actually conquer the main issues that are challenging us here on the planet now, and we evolve ourselves into the better nature parts of ourselves, and then we take that message out into the universe, and I think that is so incredibly beautiful just in general. And I think I kind of lost my train of thought. We were talking about... So pop in, gentlemen, please help me along.
Oh, well, that was epic. I mean, your contribution just now, yes, 100% I agree with all of that, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you and the whole team. At some point we'll get Vic in here for doing Star Trek Continues. I mean, one of the things that I realized as you were talking was, people were all sort of worried and concerned that, people won't like Discovery, for example, if it looks like the original show. But Star Trek Continues proves that they could have done something, that they could have added some subtleties to this universe as it was, even looking the way that it did, and it still be a huge draw for fans. And there's a kind of longer conversation to have about fan productions generally, and the judgment that came down from Axanar and how that's shifted things. And it was a really sad day for me, because this was Star Trek for me, for the we called it the dark years, me and Richard, where Enterprise was gone and the Kelvin timeline movies hadn't really shown up yet. And so things like this, when they came on, it was like, oh, wow. And yeah, the production quality, the writing, everything down to Kirk ripping his shirt, which incidentally, that made me think, shouldn't there be a regulation against somebody ripping their shirt so many times? We're just not going to give you another one. We're going to give you a lower quality shirt or something. So that was delightful. I mean, the music, the reuse of the music, and from the Enterprise incident, from Where No Man Has Gone Before, it's like a birthday present or a Christmas present to the fans. And so, thank you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. And there is so much. If people go to our website, StarTrekContinues.com, they can see all this behind-the-scene footage of how the music was composed, where it was performed, how it was put together. Vic himself did a lot of original composition add-ons to elongate original pieces of music so that they could fit particular scenes, and people, unless you knew the note-for-note music, you would never know to begin with. There was even the introduction of there's that one particular sound, wow, 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 wow. It's this special instrument that was used in the original, in Star Trek The Motion Picture, the first one, that we actually introduced into our episodes in some of the more tense moments, just as like there were all these little like Easter eggs that are in there. So I really highly encourage people to go to the website to see, or it's up on both Vimeo and YouTube as well, all the behind-the-scenes stuff, because the enrichment that you will, when you know all the time and little and special thought and care and work that went into creating all these little things that you might not have even noticed until they're brought to your attention, just makes it all the more, makes it richer and fuller in appreciation and love. And you feel our love and our appreciation for the original series when you learn all about it.
I am on that website now, and I 100% agree. Everyone in the sound of our voices should go on this website, should watch every episode, should watch every bit of the available like gag reel, scoring, teaser reel, etc. This is, I'm just going to call it, Richard, and I think you'll agree, this is Star Trek. Like, there's this whole question of canon. This I'm fine with this. Let's just go ahead and say this is as much Star Trek as anything that is made by any of the, Paramount or CBS or whatever. And we are so lucky to have had it on for so long. You guys were able to tell a complete story with it.
Yeah, that was a lot of donated days off and vacations and so much time and effort for not being paid. So it was all for the love of Star Trek. And you cannot ask this small dedicated group of people to come continually give so much of their time and energy and vacation days unless they believed passionately in it as well. So I just hope people can look and see and feel the love in every single frame, because it is definitely there.
Yeah, so Richard, you still there? Well, I hadn't heard from you in a bit. Oh, cool. Didn't want to, maybe your tongue just fell off or something. Now that we've overused that figure of speech so much. Oh, man. So to come back to the episode and ground into it a little, I really liked the fact that the symbol of the Enterprise became the symbol of Starfleet as a reward for a successful 5-year mission, and that it's an arrow rising upward, ever upward. We've analyzed, like, the 29th century Starfleet symbol before, but we've never looked at the original series symbol, and I think the meaning that Kirk gives here for it is as good as any. Like, our desire to strive and do and be better and to rise above the lesser angels of our nature, like that is Star Trek right there.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've got a lot of sci-fi out there and a lot of great sci-fi, but this was the first, number one, this show for me kicked off America's love affair with sci-fi and even possibly space opera, if you want to include it within that category. But it is still, and I think the reason that it has been around as long as it has, and the reason there are people still today, generation upon generation, growing up on it and being formed by it, is because of its beautiful look and opinion of humanity in and of itself, and what we're capable of and what we really are when we get down to it, and if given the chance, what we could do for ourselves and for the rest of the universe. And also, just as a little side note, because Enterprise, one of the other reasons, and I don't know if you had noticed that, but Enterprise was the only starship that completed their 5-year mission. Every other starship, and you kind of saw that starting at around episode 6 in our series, because we had already planned that way back then, that every other starship was inadvertently destroyed in one way or another. So the Enterprise was the only one that made it back, which is another reason why our symbol became the symbol of the Federation. I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, looking back around, go ahead.
Appreciated the note about the insignias, because one of the things we've been noting on this podcast when we've been looking at the original series is this fact that the Enterprise insignia doesn't appear to be the Starfleet insignia. And it's one of many sort of continuity things that I feel like are wrapped up in this particular episode. Like the last maybe 20 minutes are like, now we're going to bridge to the motion picture. and wrap everything up. I really liked that. It was really great attention to detail.
Well, the best writers of Star Trek fiction, or the best producers like Christopher Bennett or the Judith Linton Garfield's Reeve Stevens, who participated in season 4 of Enterprise, like they have this acute consciousness of the fact that there's this rich tapestry of literature that goes back 50 years with a lot of like notes and jots and bits and pieces that they draw together in a really elegant way while respecting the whole. And like this does that. This does that really well. Sulu in command. The return of the nameless Romulan commander who is actually hot in this actress incarnation who wants to bang Spock.
Right. The Romulan commander, my favorite female character in all of original series Star Trek. I love her.
Oh.
Love her. And we got the original actress's daughter. Oh, my gosh, the amazing Amy Rydell to reprise her mother's role. And she looks and sounds and is exactly like her. It is insane.
I was wondering how you guys pulled that off, how similar she is. I was thinking, it can't be the same actress because it's so much later. Interesting.
It's a testament to genetics, at least.
Right?
Testament to evolution.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, to come back to evolution. Well, before we go there, I had a question for you, Michele, which is, there's this fan thing that was famous, I guess, in the 70s. Richard sent me an article on sexuality in Star Trek, especially emphasizing feminism. And there was this fan fantasy running through, the literature for women of, like, Spock being this impenetrable, emotionless guy, and like female fans wanting to be that person who like broke his armor or who unlocked his heart, basically. And there is a reading of those early scenes and then what goes on later. Like I would like to imagine that your character was the one who did it, and he hadn't even fully realized that, and it was so painful to him that he then, let me finish the thought before we get your answer, but like he tragically and quite irrationally, I might add, makes up this story where he uses this one instance of him trying to integrate feelings into his character and to use them as the basis for judgment. And because it didn't work out, he says, all right, well, feelings, I'm going to set myself back. And clearly, Dr. McKenna had done all this work to like create a friendship or maybe a romantic relationship. You tell me, what was your relationship or your character's relationship to Spock at this point?
Oh, I think they definitely had a thing. Absolutely. Now, to what extent and length and kind of depth it went, I'll leave that up to the viewers to decide, but absolutely did they have a connection. And just to respond to that, I think that I thought it was absolutely beautiful, number one, that there's so many things I want to respond to. Okay, so number one, I totally vibe with the movement within fandom, especially the female fandom, of the desire to want to be that one person to crack open Spock's heart. Absolutely, totally am down with that. And how flippin' cool is it that I get to play the character who did that very thing, which I think is amazing just from a fan standpoint. Makes my heart go all aflutter because Spock is absolutely above and beyond my favorite character. I love him. I thought it was incredibly beautiful because in Spock's mind, allowing that kind of connection, and not just connection, because he has had connection and deep connection with members of his crew for years before McKenna shows up. But the kind of closeness that comes in that male-female dynamic between them, I think opened up a layer of vulnerability to him that is unacceptable, because the vulnerability and making decisions based upon emotion that then led to her death and led to near the deaths of a few other people, members of the crew, and put them all within, in serious danger of not being able to complete this mission, to him is so incredibly dangerous and we can't go there ever again. Can't go there ever again. So I don't think it was just the fact that it was absolutely a close connection, which I think they did do, but I think it went beyond that and went into the romantic kind of connection, at least feeling-wise, that made him feel incredibly vulnerable because of the decisions that were made based on that attachment. And so for him, that kind of connection that kind of vulnerability can't happen again.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny because, he is in the moment where he pushes his emotions to the side. He is as human as any one of us. I mean, like,
right.
all of us, as we develop, we constantly run into traumas and moments where we invent stories and interpretations that ultimately constrain us and cause us suffering on the basis of difficult experiences. And then we carry those around with us. And so he just has the added layer of the resources that he has to go to in his cultural backdrop include this Kolinar or this suppression of all emotion. Like now he's like, all right, well, my fundamental philosophical orientation has changed, and thank God for V'ger, right? Because
right.
Brought him out of that and brought him back enough to where he was able to, by the time of Undiscovered Country and when we see him in The Next Generation, like embrace his emotional side. And like that's also a subtlety that I really appreciated in the writing was that his desire for the reunification of Romulans and Vulcans was already there at this point, and gets catered to by that delusion. So yeah, that there's so much. You're totally right. There's so much here. Richard, where are you at, man?
I got a question for you, Michelle.
Yes.
What's it like to die in a transporter buffer?
Well, in this particular transporter buffer, that went on a beautifully, ridiculously long time.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I thought that was ridiculous.
Absolutely. But I'm not going to complain because...
Well, actually, you know what? Scotty later put himself in his transporter buffer and stored himself for 75 years. So he's just showing some of his skills here before he realizes. So there we go.
Yeah. It was the most beautiful death ever. I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And the moment there between her and Spock just makes me, I lose it every time I see that. And I'm freaking in it. Like, it's me on screen doing it. And yet me in front of the screen watching it, I will still cry. I still think it's beautiful. And I think that Todd did such an outstanding job as Spock. Beyond outstanding. And the relationship that those two created, and that is alluded to and that you start seeing a few, about episode 5 or 6, is so beautiful and special. So I don't know. I thought it was the most beautiful death possible. I could not be more pleased with the way I left that world. It was pretty outstanding. In a field of sparkles, it's kind of every sci-fi girl's dream.
You really dignified the conclusion of the series. That was a capstone. That was a bookend. And I've never considered what would be the epitome. I guess this is an epitome of acting performance, like skill, is to produce a performance that's so moving that you move yourself. But it's not just me. It's everything. It's Todd's performance. It's the amazing music. It's having Chuck and Chris there and seeing their faces. It's the music. The music is everything. Oh, for
Anyone
sure.
who does
sure.
any part of production knows that. Like you see a cut scene without it, and then you see it with it. It's night and day. So the music just absolutely brought it home. But I thought especially Todd's performance was just, oh my gosh, it was just heartbreaking. His face, you just see that kind of the realization of it, and kind of the shock of it. I don't think he understood the depth of his of what that relationship meant to him. And so when you see him fighting at the transporter controls and him kind of lose it, it's like, oh my goodness. And then you see his face when she leaves. It's just, it just gets me. And it's probably because I love Spock so much too. Like to see him in pain was just like, no, Spock. But I think it just tied together so beautifully, everything. It was one of the many things that was tied together so beautifully in that final episode.
I cried. I think I've cried every time.
I'm sorry, me too.
No. That's actually, so we have a thing on this podcast called The Moment of Compassion, where it's a thing about every Star Trek episode. As weird as it is, like there's always a moment where, at least since I started rewatching the original series all the way through to Voyager over the past 2.5 to 3 years, like literally every single episode, there was some moment of characterization or realization or whatnot that moved me to tears. And that's like my acid test. That's my litmus test for what is Star Trek. So since this did that, and
love that.
Yeah, the White Iris does this too. I mean, there's so much. I mean, so yeah.
I love that that's your litmus test, the moment of compassion. And it's usually within Star Trek, it's brought to us through the eyes of the other. The other for me is always, and perhaps this is because I always felt like the other while growing up, and I think several sci-fi fans can probably relate to that, but to me, the character I am always most drawn to, the character I am always most connected to is the other. So in the original series, it was Spock, and seeing humanity through Spock's eyes and what is revealed to us about ourselves through our relationship to him. I see it in episodes like Devil in the Dark with Horta and his connection with, it's always, to me, the beauty of Star Trek is bringing a mirror up to humanity's face through the eyes of the other. And it's just always the way I think we most beautifully see ourselves. And it usually is in a moment of compassion, because what else is there? Compassion and connection, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, that's just my personal little soapbox.
No, that's beautiful. I 100% agree. I mean, Richard's more of the kind of like enjoying making subtle, humorous references to like Cthulhu, Lovecraft style terror. But he understands the compassion's where it's at. So
it's one place that some things are at.
see, that's his humor right there. That's it.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the beautiful thing about Star Trek, though? It is going to appeal to and enlighten and embrace and excite whatever aspect, personality, whatever kind of bent you are as a person, whether it's scientific, whether it's, emotional, whether it's whatever it is, it's going to appeal to you. I truly think that Star Trek offers something beautiful and meaningful to everybody. IDIC, boys, come on.
Yes.
It's all in there.
Yes, 100%. I mean, in Futurama, they talk about Star Trek eventually becomes a religion, and then it has to be quashed because it's so powerful or something. I mean, if it were my job to convert people to Star Trek, I would do that job. I would do it well and happily.
Yes, I would do it with you.
Let's do it. Let's do it. We should start a convert people to the Star Trek religion club.
Yes, I already do it pretty much at every convention I attend. I totally do.
That could be a separate podcast. That might be fun. We should talk about that. So back to the episode for now. There's so many little bits that show such a deep understanding and appreciation for the whole original series, and also like a little bit of parody, but not too much. Like not full on Galaxy Quest, but a little bit of like winking at the viewer, like. The whole idea of every available security guard to the bridge. Really, sir? Like, do you think that's going to work? And then it's like 4 guys, and they come like 3 minutes later. Like, okay.
Yeah.
This is the history of the red shirt summarized in like
right on that huge ship. Everybody to the bridge. 3 guys show up.
All available. And one of them looked like 70 years old. I don't know, like, if I want my security guards to be in shape, or do I want them to be like a career military? I don't know. That might have just been the gray hair or the reflection on the screen.
Like, also the way that people acted. Like, I'm thinking of the scene where the Esper is forcing the guards to shoot each other and then themselves, like the facial expressions they're making. I feel like those are the kinds of facial expressions that the actors from 1969 would have been making in exactly that.
Yes.
Were you based on late 60s acting?
Well, yes, because Star Trek, especially original series, it's because of the era. It's reality but heightened. It's like reality on crack.
It's
like
melodrama, just a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about it, all of those actors, they were theater-trained actors. There were still at that time very predominantly theater-trained actors that were slowly going to or contractually popping into television and film. So everything was just so heightened. It's not on a 10, it's on a level 11 at the very least. Everything was still being done by people trying to reach the back row, even though it's a little camera right in front of them. You know what I mean? But I love it. I love that aspect about it. I love it's incredibly theatrical and everything is heightened.
Yeah, there's a quality there for the original series that wasn't there later on. I mean,
because that time period, all of those actors were really still very much theatrically trained and still actively doing theater, and at the same time also doing television and film when they could get hired. So you see that transition between the 50s, 60s acting that you saw on television and film, and then the drastic switch that happened in 70s when film became such its own medium, and the style, everything about it, like the notch went way down into all this different kind of subtlety that wasn't prevalent in most of what you were seeing on screen in the 50s and 60s.
Wow. You know your craft, you know your industry, and it's fascinating just to listen. There's a lot, as you were talking about the subtlety, I was like, the subtleties that we have missed, thinking that we are true fans of television. Like, there's a lot. We really appreciate all this. I see that through line continuing, maybe with Patrick Stewart and maybe with Avery Brooks. Maybe the captains had it. I don't know how much Scott Bakula maybe, but I know that at least. So it turns less into a theatrical quality and more into a consciousness of the weight that one is bearing when being a character on the show, eventually. Like I think somewhere between Patrick Stewart and Kate Mulgrew, there was a sense no longer of like, all right, this is theater, and more of like, I'm going to play this with a certain level of dignity and respect and intelligence, and like we definitely have that with Shaniqua Martin Green for sure. Like when I met everybody at the STLV, it was like, whoa, Star Trek is in good hands. I mean, like they know that they're impacting this complex, intricate literature and this fan base and the world ultimately. So
yes, and I think that you see the captains throughout the different series reflect what was going on societally at that time. I mean, it really is a cultural reflection of what was going on at that time. So you see a style of captain that's kind of indicative of cultural issues, norms, or challenges that were happening at that given moment. So Captain Kirk is absolutely the appropriate captain for the mid to late 60s. Absolutely. And
it's the psyche of male authority struggling with a lot of different things. Yeah,
and I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I recently went back and watched The Next Generation, which is what I grew up on, and I was dumbstruck at how much that show informed and molded my character as a person. how I view humanity, how I view our place in the world, how I view dealing with people who are foreign to us, whether it be in foreign lands or foreign planets, absolutely directly came from that show. Captain Picard formed who I am and what the values that I hold in good part. So it's I don't think there is any lack of love from any generation of Star Trek fans who grew up and was so impacted at a particularly formative time by the show that they grew up on. I think it absolutely is a reflection and a mirror up to us. I don't know. I just think it's something. Star Trek is so unique in that way. I don't know of any other show really that anywhere that has had this long and dedicated of a fandom, and that is growing and changing and evolving as much with its audience. I think it's just fascinating and beautiful. I don't know.
That's clever orbits right there. You're the first guest who was already spiritually a member of the podcast. Like that's what we're committed to bringing. And yeah, I would love already to have you back to discuss even episodes that you're not in.
Like of other shows?
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah.
You're really good at this.
What do you guys think of Discovery? Just as a side break, you can cut this out if you want to, but I'm just curious.
Richard, you want to take this?
Yeah, so I feel like the first season it had a bit of trouble finding its direction, and that's actually how pretty much every Star Trek has been. So
absolutely,
I'm still waiting for its Discovery to find out.
Well, except for Star Trek Continues.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
that's a continuation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right, Richard. If you want to say that it didn't have that problem because it wasn't trying to do the same thing, like it wasn't trying to establish a new Star Trek, it was trying to continue and complete a Star Trek that pre-existed it. Yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that. And
what do you
it
think,
succeeded.
Louis?
Oh, Discovery's great. Discovery is the attempt by the major, modern corporate producer, CBS, of Star Trek to create something that caters to modern sensibilities, like the Breaking Bad gritty darkness, and the bingeable, TV thing, which I binge-watched it with my girlfriend earlier this year, so it must be decent on that front. And, I really like it. I think, yes, it stumbled, and, could have been done better this season. But I like the direction it's going in. I have high hopes for season 2. I met the guy who plays Pike, and there was such a reverence with him and that same quality to the rest of the cast that I know they're doing their best, and I know that despite whatever happens, going on in the writers' room, behind the scenes, leading up to it, before and during the first season, that led to it coming out kind of chaotically, that it will, especially with Star Trek Lower Decks, Star Trek Picard, it will become, part of what Richard and I have begun to describe as the golden age of Star Trek. We're going to have more Trek on TV than they had in the mid-'90s or in the late 90s.
I know. It's going to be awesome. I love it. I frickin' love it. Number one, Star Trek is a huge sandbox. There's room for everybody to play. So whatever show, whatever temperature, whatever look, whatever feel, whatever era you like, you're going to have something to find in there, which is wonderful. I think developmentally it's so interesting to kind of take a look at the tone and kind of the themes that we're seeing in Discovery. In my mind, I was thinking about this, it's almost as if when we have the original series, humanity is kind of grown up enough. We have solidified within ourselves as individuals what our ideals are, what our goals are. We've set kind of parameters for ourselves. We know what we're trying to take out into the universe. And I love how in Discovery, which is before that, we're seeing that same, the struggle to come to that conclusion, to come to the resolute dedication to our higher selves, is still happening within the individuals. So, of course, it hasn't necessarily been decided as a federation what they are. Does that make sense? Like, the individuals in and of themselves internally are struggling with their own ideals and their own kind of sense of revenge or their own sense of pain or the kind of chaos that's going on in the interior lives of every human being. We haven't resolved that yet. We haven't gotten to the place we are in the original series where humanity's decided what our goals are. We've kind of solidified our sensibility and the things that we value and what we're trying to take out into the universe. In Discovery, I see that struggle still happening, and we're seeing it play out in the individual characters as well as in the Federation itself. So I just love that. To me, evolution-wise, it makes perfect sense to kind of see that struggle and drama kind of still happening between the individuals and in the interior of the Federation itself, because we haven't quite gotten there yet. We haven't gotten there to where we were necessarily in the original series. Does that make sense?
100%. It like makes Star Trek relevant to modern sensibilities, to the effect of being an incarnation of the international psyche writ large.
Right.
And showing us all those different aspects of ourselves that we are still struggling with in order to attain the ideal. Like, you can put up an ideal and then putting a benchmark between here and that ideal. I think that's actually really valuable, because then it has us get this sense of like, all right, well, I need to work and move and shift, and there's a political implication somewhere down the line to all of this eventually that someone should touch on. But for the interim, like what I saw with Discovery was, Burnham discovering that. Oh man, I just used the Discovery pun in relation to Discovery. Oops. So realizing that she had guilt and shame that she needed to let go of in order to express herself fully, to be the contribution that she's capable of being to the people around her. And we're all still dealing with that character arc for ourselves, and having an example of it, is beautiful, is helpful, is really interesting.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole thing about feminist representation, right? A black woman being the main character of the show. Like, I was like, yes, thank you, please, more.
Yes, and not just representation. I don't want to see just representation. I want to see participation. I just don't want to see stock kind of, I see multicultural faces and colors, fabulous. But I want to see the actual participation of those characters. I don't want to just see them represented. I want to see them participating. I want to see them being absolutely intricate to what is happening, because I feel like that is vitally important. I want them to have a life, and I want them to have a connection, and I want them to have a real and true part in what's going on. So that to me is just is even more important than just having representation.
For sure. Speaking to a woman actress who has been on Star Trek, basically, like, I'm sure you have a great deal of subtlety and nuance to your articulation of what Star Trek has done for women in general and what's still possible through it for women. And that could be a whole other podcast.
We could, yes, absolutely.
So Richard, I know that you're short on time, and we originally intended this for only an hour or so. I'd like, if both of you permit, just another 8 or 9 minutes to wrap this up. You guys cool with that?
I'm okay.
Sure.
Are you okay, Richard?
Yep. Awesome. So we've painted in broad strokes. We've celebrated the really awesome, classically Trekkian things about this. We've appreciated, or at least I appreciate, Marina Sirtis being used as the computer voice, for example. We're probably somewhere in the back of our head giggling at the multicolored food cubes that that you got to eat. And then, somebody somewhere is really excited, as excited as Sulu is about the saucer separation, because finally we get to see if the Enterprise can do that. We see that the Enterprise can, in fact, do that. You get this funny little throwaway line from Kirk. Oh, yes, with the help of the Romulans, we put the ship back together, and it was easy. Like, okay.
Right.
Okay. And then, I like that the ship is called the Congo. That was cool. The Halifax, that was cool. I mean, this isn't just an American show anymore. So there's a subtle internationalization that Star Trek Continues gets to do, which the original series itself wasn't fully conscious of the need for or the use of. And then the delusions that the characters get are subtly and deeply inflected with a real understanding of the characters. Kirk, of course, on some level, doesn't like that 73 people have died in 5 years under his command. So, this is an exacerbation of something that was under the surface, that his personality structure is so strong and resilient in relation to, that it takes a situation like this, and then Dr. McKenna's death, for it to have a real impact on his day-to-day living. Like, it was there, and it was a real thing, but it was brought up from his subconscious in those moments, which I really liked. There were a couple things that were really funny, though, that I want to talk about real quick. There's the scenes near the end, and I don't know if you all got this experience, but I definitely did, which was there's something about the Commodore or whatever he was. He had like 5, 6 brains on his hybrid original series motion picture uniform. I couldn't even count. Like, I literally paused the episode a couple times just to try to count, and the way the braids wrapped around. And I love that, because it's clear, above all, that he is above Kirk, which is all we really need. But there was something about the actor and his speaking and lip movements that made it almost seem dubbed. I don't know, Richard, did you see that? Did you get that sense, that feel to his lines?
Yeah, it looks like his audio was a little out of sync with his lips.
Yeah.
That entire role was ADR'd.
Oh,
There's
wow.
a different actor doing his voice.
Oh,
yes.
I'm so grateful that was a real thing.
You
because
are
for a
not
second
crazy.
There, yeah. I was like, did I watch too many Godzilla movies when I was younger? Is this
No, Andy Holt was having a really hard time with the lines and pronunciation, and he is our friend. He was playing Admiral Nagura, and he's wonderful. His look and feel was wonderful, but he was having a really hard time on the day just with pronunciation and vocal inflection. So it was honestly, instead of in an independent production, we can't go back and do reshoots. We don't have reshoots. We never did them. We didn't have time to do them. So the easiest thing to do was to have it ADR'd. Yes.
Mm. So that explains both who he is, what he is, and what's going on, which I really appreciate. Oh, the question that I was left with is one of those, Clever Orbit's classic subtleties that we like to dig into, that I'm sure Richard will be able to fabricate a really fascinating answer for, is why do uplifted espers get silver eyes, other than because it looks cool? I know that, production-wise it looks cool, but Richard, what would you say? What would you theorize?
Well, my scientific explanation is, you might have heard that the eyes are the window into the soul.
Yes.
No, I think that was it, Michelle. I think that's literally all the work he's going to do.
My response will simply be because it looks cool.
Yeah. That's ultimately enough for me. But being a Trekkie, we like.
There is a deep explanation here that I just came up with, which is, actually the way that our eyes look is highly connected with our evolution as social creatures. So humans have this property that we have whites around our irises. You can see where we're looking. Most animals don't have that. You can't actually see where they're looking. And that means that you can keep track of other people's intentions. And there's a prominent theory that the reason our eyes evolved this way is precisely so that you can keep track of what other people are looking at and their intentions. It has to do with our evolution as social creatures. And now what espers are is they're like the next stage of that. They're the stage where you you can actually read each other's thoughts. That's like the next stage of being a social organism, right? Since they can read each other's thoughts, they don't need to look at each other's eyes anymore. So they can have these shining silver eyes representing the evolution of their eusociality and the fact that they've transcended the old mechanisms. There you go.
Oh,
There's
I love that. There you go. I like it.
I knew if we pushed you just a little bit, you'd have something golden. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Took a few seconds.
I just love the fact that the espers were uplifted, but still ruled by their lower human natures. Like that was
Ironic.
They were doing. I just love that. That if we, and I think that's a metaphor. If we push ourselves, if we are not careful, if we're not careful, we don't just do something because we can, right? We shouldn't just do something simply because we can. And that was like her scariest line to me in that episode, when he asked her about the hood because they cut off their life support. You know, they had them. That was how the hood was destroyed, is that she just turned off their life support. She just or had them blow each other up, one of the two. And there were a couple different situations with the ships, what the espers did with them. And it really was, she was wreaking all of that havoc, and they were wreaking all of that havoc simply because they could. And isn't that the most frightening thing when it comes to humanity? If we don't have the maturity and the understanding, and we haven't evolved our sense of what we're here to do and what's truly important, just simply gaining ability without the wisdom that goes along with it. And that, to me, was the most beautiful kind of point about that, is that we really are our own worst enemy. If we don't have the evolved emotional, psychological sensibility to go along with whatever technical ability we have, we are screwed, people. We're screwed. So I just love that. Anyway.
Yeah, it's ultimately all about self-awareness and self-mastery. The pointing to that here is really delightful. So my past 5 years since I moved to Austin have for me been both because of my desire to engage in and my realization of the importance of doing that self-mastery work. And we see this arc with all of the Star Trek characters, and then we hear it expressed by Kirk. And, ironically and interestingly enough, and this will be my final thought, and then we'll go to ratings, which I'm really curious what your rating for your own episode will be. But the integration of emotional depth, subtlety, precision, the need to take time to heal and process and even listen to one's intuition emotionally, which I believe is a faculty that we do all have, and was talking about earlier with Richard. Those have been kind of the most revolutionary things that I have learned in working on myself for the past 5 years. And it's so refreshing to have a character who represents all of those things, show up and bring that to the table with the Enterprise crew. I mean, Spock is always fighting himself to integrate emotions, but it's always this sort of cold, hard, fight between reason and emotion. There's never a sense of all right, emotion is a thing, it's here, it needs to be integrated and worked with and managed and sometimes healed. And so the position of the counselor, and then you in particular, really brought that to Star Trek in a way that I haven't seen elsewhere. I mean, we could talk about you versus Troy, and we can also talk about all right, so where was the counselor in Deep Space Nine? Because they really needed one.
No kidding.
Or Voyager, or Discovery for that matter. But Richard would probably say that character did exist. They were just so underpaid and underused that none of their scenes were interesting enough to have on a story, something like that. But, okay, so I give this a 9.8 because with that 0.2 left over, I'm sure that this could have been better in some way. I just can't imagine what that way could have been. So, Richard, we'll go to you, and then we'll finish with Michelle. What would you give this? Any final thoughts on it?
I don't see any reason not to give it a 10.
All right.
All right, Richard.
I'm back to I'm moving up to a 9.9.
Well, I think I'm a bit biased, just because the amount of time and love and work that went into the entire series is kind of culminated in this one. So just like I think mothers have with their children, we get to be very blind to any little technical flaws or little things we wish we could have changed or done over, because nothing is perfect. No person is perfect, nor is any production perfect. So certainly there are little things I wish could have changed, but on the whole, for what it intended to be and the effort that was put into succeeding in what it was trying to be, I'm going to give it a 10 just because I love it so much.
All right. Now I'm on 9.9 repeating. Well, it's been a super, super delight to have you on, Michele. You're certainly welcome back in the future to discuss more of this or other episodes of other shows. And thanks for your perspective and your experience, your expertise, the subtlety you brought. And then, Richard, thanks for always being on, and your humor was on point today. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Clever Orbits. Please definitely feel free to like, share, subscribe, comment below, and live long and prosper to all of you.
Woohoo!
So this is our epilogue. Richard has gone to greener pastures, but Michele has hung around, and you just had this quote that was quintessential for the level of the episode on which I really want people to engage, which is like looking at themselves. And you said we are all looking outside of ourselves to avoid looking inside ourselves. And this addiction to power, for example.
Yep.
That Lana's character still clearly has. Empathy is there inside all of us, and just because we have superpowers doesn't mean we necessarily have to use them in a negative way, as is shown by the blonde-haired character who touched Gary Mitchell.
Smith. Yes.
Smith.
Yes. Yes. Like he is. Yes.
She's not lusting after power outside of herself. She has done that work to look inside of herself, and so she ends up being the representation of the better angels of our nature evolved.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to acknowledge that quote, and we may have to timestamp this episode so people can come straight to this quote because it's so good.
It's true. And humanity will be, if we are left to our own devices, if we continue to search outside to find meaning outside of ourselves in whatever is immediately in front of us, as opposed to looking at a horizon beyond that. There is no hope for us. So I know that that's why I love Star Trek so much, because it shows us what can happen if we're willing to do that work, if we're willing to no longer look for the immediate satisfaction of things or money or people or relationships or possessions or power or status, and look further beyond that. Pull back the microscope a bit and look more at what is for the betterment of us all, and start thinking about things in terms of that. And that obviously and interestingly leads us to a deeper reflection on what's inside of ourselves, and coming to terms with that. It just, it cracks us open to the possibility of having compassion for others and compassion for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because my deepest commitment in life is to be the highest and best that is possible for me, and that requires a lot of introspection and a lot of internal work. And
it sure does.
To have that commitment expressed through Star Trek so specifically and precisely, though, that's delightful. That's like, whoa.
Yes, the hope of Star Trek, right?
The hope of Star Trek. And with that,
yes.